Nel cor più non mi sento brillar la gioventù, cagion del mio tormento. Amor, sei colpa tu, mi pizzichi, mi stuzzichi, mi pungichi, mi mastichi. Che cosa è questo in me? Pietà, 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 amore un certo che disperar mi fa.
Welcome to Pacific Unitarian Universalist Church. Great to have Abraham back. A few announcements. The biggest announcement that is probably exciting to most of us is that on May 2nd, which is first Sunday in May, surprisingly to no one, we're going to be back here. So we're back in a limited fashion. It's going to be New Member Sunday. We're going to induct probably somebody 6 to 10 or 11 new people over the last couple of years. We haven't had a ceremony. So I'm going to be in touch with some of those folks to sort of give them a little tutorial. But the biggest news is that we're going to have 40 seats in here. So it's sort of a first come, first serve thing. We're going to have little groups of twos and maybe a couple threes and mostly individual seats. So we're also going to provide seats outside. So you can gather towards the windows if you know the campus and you can look in, but we're going to try to be as safe as we can be. But the first Sunday in May on, we're going to have in-person services here. That's the big news and good news. This group this week is writing group at 10. Anyone is welcome to come. We Zoom that and we meet in person. And the writing topic is a conversation with your younger self from 30, 40 years ago, any kind of creative act in that. There's also a Tuesday 11 o'clock Zoom and a 3 p.m. Zoom on Wednesday. This coming Saturday, we've just closed the introduction to racism service, which Kim did a great job, and Michelle supporting it, Andrea supporting it as well. We're going to run that same group course, which we've kind of come to love, starting on the evening of May 6th. So if you're new to the conversations about white supremacy and racism and the institutional racism that sort of defines our culture, that's the best way to jump in, is that Thursday evening. Think of it as the first Thursday. You can jump in. It's a 6-week course where we sort of group things together. This particular Sunday, in a couple hours from now at 1 o'clock, we're doing a widening the circle, which is the UU report on institutional change in relationship to racism. The deeper dive group that's been engaging in this conversation for a year now is engaged in that. We're in debates about how welcome anyone who's not engaged that conversation at all is, but you could probably talk your way in if you're really interested in being a part of that. We have books available here on campus too. So that is the news, and I'm going to invite our worship associate today, Jean Tordella, up to share our words while I light our chalice.
We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
Thank you, Jean. Our topic today is death and dying. It's the kickoff to our Saturday series that begins at 10 this coming weekend. Nice topic, Steve, you might say. Really got me out of bed this morning. There was a Laverne and Shirley marathon on TV, you know. I know, don't remind me. All you have to endure is an hour of some of the hardest stuff we have to live with. I've had to live with thoughts of it all week, especially in a week where I just found out William de Klerk, who is Georgie Ann de Klerk's first husband, ex-husband, passed away this week, so that's sad. But it's been a hard week, but it's also been a rich week in a way. Sometimes, maybe even mostly, death is terrifying, depressing. But there's a stillness of thought that comes with it as well. When you come to accept that death is a part of life that's hard to touch, you can deepen. And I think without the muses of love and death, it's difficult in a way to go as deep as a human being can. So I want us to pay attention to that feeling today. The sermon is dedicated to that and the thoughts of being able to engage this for the next month and a half on our adult ed Saturday mornings. So it's an intimate thing, and there'll be people in this series. We'll probably have some lawyers there, actually. We're going to have some counselors, some chaplains there. We're going to come in with some people who are on the compassionate choices, the campaign to assist people to die. So it's going to be some real rich conversations. But that's coming Saturday, and that is also the topic for our sermon. I'd like to now turn it over to our own Severin, who's going to share with us a hymn.
Please join us in singing number 96, I Cannot Think of Them as Dead. We'll do the first two verses.
I cannot think of them as dead who walk with me no more. Along the path of life I tread, they are but gone before. They are but gone before. And still their silent ministry within my heart has blazed. As when on earth they walked with me and met me face to face, and met me face to face.
I'd like to invite our children forward to the computer screen, but soon enough here. Church is, in a way, like life school. That's the way sort of I like to think about it. We go to school and we learn about math, and you learn about how to read, and you learn about all these particular things. But in school, you can't really, people have so many different feelings about religion and about death that it's hard for all of us to agree on what they're going to teach in the schools, in churches, and synagogues, and mosques, and temples, and all the places that people go or they don't go, is a place to learn about life. And one of the biggest things, one of the biggest reasons we have to learn about life is the truth of death. Down in the preschool, whenever they have an animal, there's a lot of animals in the preschool. They have lizards, and they have bunnies, and they have stuff, and they always do a ceremony, and then they mark the ground where they bury the animal. This is Spike. Spike was a lizard. And it's a way to remember, and it's a way to honor life. So when we think about life, you know, if you kids are struggling with the idea of death, it's fair. It's hard for everybody, and it's going to be hard for you and for everyone the whole way through. That's the sort of hard news. The good news is that death reminds us about how precious life is. I know that's strange, right? It's hard to balance those two things out, because if we didn't have death, then life would just continually go on and it wouldn't quite maybe mean as much. So in a congregation, when somebody dies, which happens a lot with a big group of people, we often have a service and we honor the life that they lived, and we sort of send them off in the way that the stone marks the sending off of something to whatever comes next. Maybe nothing, who knows, maybe a whole nother life, maybe another reincarnated life. We really don't know. We hope, most of us, that something else comes after it, and very well it might, and very well might not too. But one thing that we can do is we can love those things that we love along the way. And we can make sure that we remember them as much as we can as we go. And that's why love and death are attached. So when you have a lost pet, I remember being about 7 or 8 years old, and my dog, I could hear the tires, and my dog got hit, and it was very hard. My dog got killed, as many of you might have lost a pet or a grandparent. It's very hard. And just want you to know that this church loves you and that those feelings are okay to have. Sadness is an okay feeling to have around issues of death and the fear of death. So that's not any particular bit of wisdom, but that is the truth. So when you're feeling sad about those thoughts, that's okay. And you can come to your parents, and, you know, when it's safe to hug people, or the people that are in your place that you can, you know, share space with, you can ask for that. So we can't take away the sting of death necessarily, but we can comfort one another, and that's really what we try to do. And each week we do joys and concerns, right? A lot of what we do is concerns for people. So this is for all of us. And we light this one candle. We normally, as anyone who's been a part of this church, everybody comes up and speaks for themselves. This week, or in the most recent week, our own Margot had a small stroke that she seems to have recovered from. That might be news to some of you. She's doing fine. Steve Schlegel had his little concern about his heart within the last 10 days or so. And Georgianne de Klerk lost, and some of us might remember Bill de Klerk passed away on April 1st. And we also have one of our long-term members, Pam Harris, has a granddaughter who's struggling with cancer, which is really hard, and that struggle just continues. And you know, we keep all of them in our hearts, and that really is our prayer. So we think of those 4 things, and I know that you have stories in your own life of hard things and joyful things. We're coming up on graduations, and those count too. And in that spirit, Jean Tordell is going to share with us a prayer.
The prayer for today. Each week, as we come to the time in our service for contemplating our joys and sorrows, those we share and those we hold in our hearts, we are reminded of the vulnerability of our happiness, our health, our loved ones, and of the lives that we've built. This morning, I would like to share with you a prayer by the Unitarian minister A. Powell Davies. When sorrow comes, let us accept it simply as part of life. Let the heart be open to pain. Let it be stretched by it. All the evidence we have says that this is the better way. An open heart never grows bitter, or if it does, it cannot remain so. In the desolate hour, there is an outcry, a clenching of the hands upon emptiness, a burning pain of bereavement, a weary ache of loss. But anguish, like ecstasy, is not forever. There comes a gentleness, a returning quietness, a restoring stillness. This, too, is a door to life. Here also is the deepening of meaning, and it can lead to dedication, a going forward to the triumph of the soul, the conquering of the wilderness. And in the process will come a deepening inward knowledge that in the final reckoning, all is well.
We're going to follow this prayer with a meditation. We're going to precede our sermon with a reading from Ralph Waldo Emerson called The Oversoul. The oversoul was a term that they would use, that the transcendentalists would use to describe God or to replace God and take the personality out of it. The words are a little ornate, but the sentiment is smart and beautiful. Emerson begins, "Let us learn the revelations of all nature and thought, that the highest dwells within us, that the sources of nature are in our own minds.
As there is no screen or ceiling between our heads and the infinite heavens, so there is no bar or wall in the soul where we, the effect, cease, and God, the cause, begins."
Emerson says, "I am constrained every moment to acknowledge a higher origin for the events than the will I call mine."
There is deep power in which we exist, and whose beatitude is accessible to us.
Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it is memorable.
It comes to the lowly and simple. It comes to whosoever will put off what is foreign and proud. It comes as insight. It comes as serenity and grandeur.
Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it is memorable. The soul's health consists in the fullness of this reception. I love that.
Forever and ever, the influx of this better and more universal self is new and unsearchable.
Within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one.
When it breaks through our intellect, it is genius. When it breathes through our will, it is virtue. When it flows through our affections, it is love.
Thank you, Jean. I love that. Beautiful, isn't it? Just, I think of Emerson as speaking about sort of the physics of the soul of the universe there. And what a transition to talk about the hardest stuff, right? Death. When I was 17, I think I've told this story before. I drove my mother's car into a tree in a high school parking lot. I had been a driver for about 5 or 6 months. I wasn't drinking, but I was newly minted and I had a car, my mother's car full of friends, taking a corner too quickly. It was a rainy night, and in that simple mistake, I put my recently former best friend, it was about the last night we were probably going to hang out. We were sort of shifting groups as you do when you're the cliques in school. I put my best friend or former best friend into the hospital. I was banged up with a concussion, and, well, we didn't know in the moment. What I did know is that he had gone head first from the back seat into the windshield of my mother's Monte Carlo. And I knew he was in the next bay in the emergency room next to me, a bay divided by one of those sort of pull hospital curtains. And in this case, they hadn't pulled it forward quite enough. So I was on the right-hand side and he was next to me. I didn't know how I knew that, but I did. And I watched them take these things that looked like skin. They were bloody, and they were throwing them into this tin, this old hospital metal tin. I wondered if I killed him. Did I break his head open? I didn't have the exact words to capture that feeling, but boy, nauseous, anxious dread is pretty close. Might be the worst moment of my life. Had I been able to crawl out of my own body at that time, at that moment, I would have. This moment would be the exact opposite of what Emerson speaks of so eloquently. Had I been able to trade places with him, I would have done that too. I remember that. And I suspect all of us have those moments in our lives, right? Diagnosed with cancer, moments bigger than life that threaten our very well-being or those closest to us that love us, watching someone die. Thankfully, thank God, thank fate, thank whatever, I don't care, or just luck, that the stuff being tossed in the metal tin was not his skin, as I found out. It was just blood and peroxide-soaked gauze. They were stitching up his forehead. He had 164 stitches. He turned out to be fine. We're still friendly acquaintances. But sometimes it's not gauze. And at some point for you and everyone you love, it will not be just gauze. If the first truth of death and dying is that it's utterly terrifying, and when near at hand, wordlessly, immediately demanding every bit of our attention, the second truth that is that in the long run, there's absolutely nothing you can do to prevent experiencing death. Some sermon, Steve. Thanks. I know. At some point, you will not be able to run away. At some point, it won't be gauze. Certainly, you can take steps to postpone that moment, and you probably should, by making choices to smoke salmon over cigarettes and drive a four-wheel Volvo over a Formula One race car. But if you're an adult, I don't need to tell you that you can eat all the kale you want. There is no escape. And even though we know it, we don't like to be reminded of it. It's hard. You're an adult. You know that no amount of money you can earn or steal, no achievements, no words, no religion, regardless of what happens after, will keep aging and eventually death from your door. It's irrefutably true, and yet it's hard to hear and say. As Aina Nalek, sort of a one-hit wonder in her hit song, which you may have heard from about 15 years ago, called Breathe, She says life is an hourglass glued to the table, and that no one can find the rewind button, which is just tragic. And she follows up with, so cradle your head in your hands and breathe. Just breathe. And we know this, and it still depresses me. And when I'm despairing, when I feel the sting of it, I kind of wanted to create this sermon to sort of drag that feeling up for all of us. For the 1,000th time, you can tell me about how grateful I should be for being alive in the first place, and how against all unimaginable odds that we've been given life as a gift, and that even life itself exists. And I will tell you that you're right, and I will tell you that I don't care. I'm just disturbed at the small print at the end of the contract that we never signed for being alive is that we have to face death. And far worse, that's far worse than even your present cable contract, which is probably pretty bad. And nobody's going to tell me, and I'm not going to tell you that despair is inappropriate in the face of death, because I think it is appropriate. I wish I could go back. I can't remember this, and I don't know if any one of us remembers this. Maybe you do. The first time you grasp that things die, you probably come to it slower. I do remember this moment. I've mentioned it in a sermon before. I remember reading Pinocchio. My mother was reading it to me in my aunt's house. I was sitting on a chair, and there was this news that Geppetto, Pinocchio's dad, died. And I remember not wanting to physically accept that. And I had to crawl off my mother's lap. I was probably, 4, I'm guessing. The fact that it I remember that makes, the story harder. But the process of absorbing death, if you come around to it and you have to go through it, because there's nothing more despairing. But if I didn't feel like there was something else gained, I probably would ignore it. I would probably numb myself. I probably wouldn't talk about it in the pulpit. I would probably want to crawl off of here, just like I wanted to crawl off my mother's lap. Because we're in an interestingly odd place, really. Among living things, we sort of believe, there may be others, but it's pretty limited to pretty smart creatures that we're aware of our mortality. It's kind of uniquely ours. And that is the price we pay for the emotional, intelligent life that we have. This evolutionary biologist, Ludwig von Bertaflein, which is an amazing name in itself, says it more beautifully than I can. Try to remember these words. They're fabulous. Life spirals laboriously upward to higher and higher levels, paying for every step. Death was the price for the multicellular condition. Pain was the price for the nervous integration, the nervous system. And anxiety is the price for consciousness. Now, if that is not the ultimate blessing / trap, I don't know what is. It's not easy to be a human being. But death offers more than despair. And I only wax on about it because it should break your heart. Like, you should really be hurting. Like, that's the point. But the good news is that there's some emotional gains from this process. Thank goodness there are. And if you're sitting there a while and your body gets tired of being despairing and depressed, maybe you get a little hungry, maybe you get a little fidgety, maybe you remembered you got to put that bill in the mail, and you have kids you love that you're worried about, and there's actually a few people out there that like you and care about you. Truth is, the numbness and despair is only so constructive. We are built to move forward. You can insulate yourself, probably should for a little bit. A little numbness never hurts. For the truth is that a life that knows death and lives with it understands life better, knows life more fully, probably knows it more compassionately. I'm officially on the record as someone who doesn't want to die. It is the chief thing I want or don't want. And as honest a statement as that is, if you flip it and you place before yourself the idea that you would endlessly live on with all the challenges and struggles that life brings, that it were never going to cease, if you stop to ask yourself if you want that to never cease, you might actually come out at the other end. It softens me up to the openness to death. I can't explain that. I can't put rational words to that. Reverend Forrest Church, who was the minister of the large church All Souls in New York City, wrote eloquently about his own coming death. It's a great book. He wrote about it in 2009. He wrote that death can elevate human to humane. And it can like the stiff, cold winds. If you've ever felt stiff, cold winds as a Californian, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, it can clear us from our pettiness. He says, mortality, like mortar, has the capacity to ground us and bring us together. And if you live with death long enough, if you're brave enough to get back out of your own despair and brave enough not to turn away, death actually offers a better life. Could be a sober warning to life's preciousness. It is this feeling that people speak about when they say that cancer saved their lives. You hear that from time to time. Or that a heart attack, that people were grateful for these bold mishaps that nearly took them from this space. Confronting death, and it's sort of, there's an endless writings and sermons about this, but death can alert us to life's fragility, and can make us aware of the value of compassion and life's preciousness. So to be fully human, fully spiritually involved regarding death, it can increase our capacity to care. It almost has to, doesn't it? And attending to death can prompt the most eloquent form of caring imaginable. The forces of illness and death call us to clarify what is important to us. At least they should, and mostly they do. Like a big play on a sporting event, the final clicks of the clock, or like preparing and sitting down for the SATs when you're a 16 and a half, 17-year-old. It can draw the limits of what really matters for us. Living with this wisdom can begin to transform what we feel entitled to what we're grateful for. And rather than wanting to slide off our mother's laps like I did back then and into a corner, dealing with death with maturity can often call us to rise up and live in accordance with what matters the most, forcing us to decide in a way that life doesn't always command us to do. Death can, in fact, dignify love. Death brings despair. Death brings something, if we might call it, at the best, an enlightenment. So we all have the choice as to how much we want to be lost in our work or our TV, numb ourselves. We all participate in that to some degree or another. I participate in that plenty. You can skate through life, and a lot of what I do to cope is to just sort of numb myself from the things that surround me. But in the end, if you spend your life doing mostly that, what matters is you will remember that you've lost the scent of love and that the emotional math is not difficult here. You will pay inevitably by watching those you love suffer and thinking about your own passing, or you will pay by not experiencing life really at its marrow. And you will probably at that point numb yourself, not have people to join you in your own suffering. The math of life is simple. You will pay by feeling the transformative ache, or you will pay by a whole raft of internal questions about why your life matters. Contemplating the mystery of life, love, and death with the knowledge that there is a finish line can deepen us. Death is terrifying, but it deepens us. when there is a finish line, at least in the physical form, the way we know each other and get real comfortable with who we are, you're bound to pay more attention. So, this is our time right now to be alive and to give what love we can, rally out to one another, to do the justice we can do, to give ourselves the job of that in this world, and to remind us to be alive now while we can. Amen. And a little humor at the end of that heavy journey. There were 3 clergy, and they were at a funeral, at a wake, and they gathered together, and they were sort of discussing what it would be like to be in the casket. The Baptist preacher said, "You know what I'd like them to say? I'd like them to say that I was a wonderful husband and a fine spiritual leader and a good family man," Baptist preacher says. And the Catholic priest was standing there, and they're all talking, and he says, "I'd like to hear that I was a wonderful teacher of the scriptures, and that I was a servant of God, and that I made a difference in people's lives." And the female Unitarian Universalist minister said, "You know what I'd like to hear them say? I'd like to hear them say, 'Look, she's moving.'" Give generously for the life and work of this church.
Please welcome Abraham. We're going to do a song that was arranged by Benjamin Britten called The Sally Garden.
Down by the Sally Gardens, my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens with little snow white feet. She bid me take love easy as the leaves grow on the tree. But I, being young and foolish, with her did not agree. In a field by the river, my love and I did stand, and on my leaning shoulder she laid her snow white hand. She bid me take life easy as the grass grows on the weirs. But I was young and foolish, and now am full of tears.
In closing, let us remember that this church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all of our differences and beneath all of our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together. In spite of time and death and the space between the stars, we pause in silent witness to that unity.
May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts, now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Shalom. Salam. Namaste. Blessed be. And now our service truly begins.
Ici-bas, tous les lilas meurent, tous les chants des oiseaux sont beaux. Je rêve aux étés qui demeurent toujours. Ici-bas, les lèvres effleurent sans rien laisser de leur Je rêve au baiser qui demeurera toujours. Ici-bas, tous les hommes pleurent, leurs amitiés ou leurs amours. Je rêve un couple qui demeure, un couple qui demeure.
One last announcement. Sorry to ruin the moment, but we are having a church, I apologize for this, we're having a church cleanup day this coming Saturday on the 17th from 11 to 1:30. We're going to have pizza as well. People can work in the garden. We're going to cut down our shrubbery a little bit. Andy's going to be here and Carolyn and Ray will be in the garden. So if you want to come up, bring kids, we can come up and we're going to spruce up the joint. So please consider that after the death and dying moment on 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. Thanks for being here today. All right.